Welcome to our presentation of Repetition of the Bible versus JEPD, the documentary hypothesis. This presentation is based on Repetition of the Bible by myself, Giacchino Michael Cascione, edited by David Kuski, Robert Dargitz, and Rolf Preuss. Copies are available through RedeemerPress.org, Amazon, Northwestern Publishing House, Christian News, or you can write to RedeemerPress.org, or you can call 586-553-0555. And for the past few centuries, there have been a lot of questions about the source and origin of the Bible, particularly the first 5 books. Were they written by Moses or someone who used the name Moses? Or were they written by a supposed group of 4 different organizations or tribes, committees, however you describe it, called with the initials JEPD, and then R would be the redactor, the one who edited their 4 documents together. And the debate has been going on for the past, couple hundred years, or maybe a little longer, and it continues to be the primary source of criticism for the entire Bible. And in this presentation, our goal is to prove that the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are nearly all the work of one writer who identified himself by the name Moses. Today, all universities teach that these books are an anthology of Hebrew myths gathered from 4 sources known as JEPD, and written over a period of approximately 500 years and edited by a redactor known as R, and this is known as the documentary hypothesis. We're going to present new research based on repetition in the Hebrew text that proves that the documentary hypothesis is completely in error and that the first 5 books of the Bible are based on the work of one writer. And I'll show you this book here. That was published this year, Repetition of the Bible, and that's our goal, to demonstrate that regardless of what the universities are saying and the scholars are saying, we can prove from internal evidence in the Hebrew text itself that also spills over into the New Testament. We can prove from internal evidence based on the Hebrew text that we have the original Bible as constructed by one author, and it must be so from the evidence we're going to show based on repetition in the text. So this presentation is a color-coded comparison of the documentary hypothesis, also known as JEPD, with evidence from the Bible based on the research of Umberto Cassuto. Moshe David Cassuto and Richard Elliott Friedman are 2 Jewish scholars with diametrically opposed explanations for the origin of the Bible. In order to explain the difference between their views on the Bible, we will examine 1. Moshe David Umberto Cassuto, 2. Repetition of the Bible, 3. Source criticism, 4. Richard Elliott Friedman, 5. The documentary hypothesis, 6. Color coding JEPD, and repetition of the Bible versus the JEPD hypothesis. Now, who is Moshe David Cassuto? He was a rabbi born in Florence in the year 1883 and died in Jerusalem in 1951. You can call back these screens as you choose, but just by freezing this video when you're watching it on YouTube. Cassuto was hired by the Vatican in 1925 because he was the best scholar they could find, and he was the one that was chosen to be the archivist for their magnificent collection of Semitic scrolls, the greatest collection in the world. This is 1925. From 1925 to 1938, Cassuto had the chance to examine this library, this treasure of ancient Hebrew scrolls, and archive them, write about them, research them, until he was literally run out of Italy by Mussolini and the Nazis in 1938, and his son was caught and died in prison camp, and his daughter died in the attempt to free Israel, and that would be his daughter-in-law, I should say. Anna di Giacchino was killed in the war for Israeli independence, and his grandson, Dr. David Cascione, became the mayor of Jerusalem. He was a genius in linguistics, and particularly in hieroglyphics, Hittite, Latin, Greek, Babylonian, Syriac, Sumerian, Ugaritic. He has a magnificent collection of books that have been translated in English. Let me show a few of those to you right now. This is a volume of his book on Exodus. It's available through Varda Books. The publisher of this book and the other books, Alexander Gendler in Skokie, Illinois, a Chicago suburb. And here we have two more books. The Genesis Commentary, Volume 1, from Adam to Noah, Volume 2, from Noah to Abraham, also published by Varda Books. And also here we have another volume, The Documentary Hypothesis, published by Umberto Cassuto. Now, as we examine these books, here we see the titles I have here for you. We're also going to look at the second part of this, repetition in the Bible. In his commentaries, Cassuto details well over 100 examples of what he calls key words or phrases that repeat in 7s, 10s, or 12s, or multiples of these numbers in paragraphs, chapters, or sections of Genesis and Exodus. We're going to explain that in a moment. We're going to give you the evidence. We're going to show you the proof. But I just want to say what it was. So the following are a few examples produced by applying Cassuto's methodology when searching for heptadic, that's multiples of 7s, decadal, multiples of 10s, or dodecadal, multiples of 12 repetition. Here's the first example in heptadic, or multiples of 7s. Over the face of all the earth. There's a phrase. It appears in Genesis 1:29. And it repeated exactly 7 times in the book of Genesis. You won't find any place else, the entire Pentateuch, it's repeated exactly 7 times, Genesis 1:29 to Genesis 41:56. This means that the writer of Genesis had to wait 40 chapters before he finished off his internal meter. It was Cassuto's research that first identified that this was a Hebraic genre. Here's an example of the Hebrew, for the scholars who want to look at that, and al panei kal haaretz, over the face of all the earth. Exactly 7 times. Is this a coincidence? Well, if it was one word, you might say it's a 1 in 7 chance, or multiples of 7s. But now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So that multiples go 7 times 7 times 7 times 7. That's 7 to the 4th power. This is hardly a coincidence. Here's another example. That creep on the earth 7 times. Here we have that creeps on the earth 7 times. And here again, the Hebrew, Genesis 1:26 through 8:19. Exactly 7 times. That's all that's found on that phrase, the entire book of Genesis. Now, there are hundreds of these. We're just showing you 2 examples. Fowl of the air, 10 times. Starts in Genesis 1:29, finishes off in Genesis 9:2, never written again throughout the rest of the 5 books of the Bible. The cattle meter, 10 times. Here we have that it was good. Kal tov. Genesis 1:4 through Genesis 49:15. The writer waits 48 chapters to finish this unique form of Hebraic meter. In all the land of Egypt, now here we have in dodecadal, or 12 times, in all the land of Egypt, exactly 12 times in Exodus 5:12 through 11:6. That's the only time that phrase appears. Bakal, Eretz, Mitzrayim. in all the land of Egypt. All flesh, 12 times. Genesis 6:12 through Genesis 9:17. Now here are some basic rules if you want to try and do this yourself, if you're familiar with Hebrew. First of all, isolate the Pentateuch in the Hebrew search engine. Secondly, replace prefixes and suffixes with asterisks for search words. 3, do not include duplicate variant readings. And 4th, turn off the vowel point recognition. The vowel points are not original with the text, so you won't get all of the possibilities if you leave the vowel point search on. Now here we have the third point of our presentation, source criticism. What is source criticism? Biblical source criticism originated in the 18th century with the work of Jean Astruc, who adapted the methods already developed for investigating the texts of classical antiquity. That's Homer's Iliad, and in particular his own investigation of the book of Genesis. The whole point became what is known as higher criticism, and the concept was we can analyze the text and see where all these parts were what they looked like, where they came from, or how they were edited into one document. They did this with the Iliad. It's been done Aesop's fables and so forth. Who put them together? What possible sources? And we'll just deal with this like one big myth of collated anthology. And so here we have one of the most well-known source critics for the history of the Old Testament, as they refer to it, Richard Elliott Friedman. He was born in 1946. He's a biblical scholar and an Ann and J. Davis Professor of Jewish Studies at the University of Georgia. Friedman was born in Rochester, New York. He earned his Ph.D. in Hebrew and Near Eastern languages and civilization from Harvard in 1978. He has numerous awards and academic and literary achievements. He is probably the most famous for his work, Who Wrote the Bible? A description and justification for the documentary hypothesis. Let me show you that book. There's been over 250,000 of these sold. I have the first edition from 1987, so others look a little different now. And inside the book, Friedman then takes apart the entire Pentateuch and gives page after page of columns in the back of the various sources, whether it's JEPD, where they all came from and what they are. Who are these groups? And he says that if you follow this, you'll find the various sources, but then how do you know what they are? Well, it's kind of difficult to see if you're doing it in black and white, so they start color coding. So we're going to show you some of that process. Now, the documentary hypothesis, all major universities teach, and most seminaries, by the way, most seminaries in this country no longer agree that Genesis was written by Moses, or that there's one author for Moses. They teach that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy were an assembled work from 4 sources, the J group, E group, P group, D group, and then edited by R, redactor. Now, here we have the history of this. The J is Yahweh's, 950 BC. The E is Elohis, 850 BC. The D is Deuteris, 600 BC. Priestley, P, 500 BC. And then redactor, or it was the editor, 500 to 300 BC. That's the history that they've constructed versus saying that it was written in 1500 BC by one author. Therefore, the claim is made that the entire Bible is based on a fraud, and therefore all references to Moses, even by Jesus, are fraudulent. Therefore, the entire New Testament is fraudulent because Moses is referenced 80 plus times. And they're all referencing their teaching based on someone who they're claiming doesn't even exist and never existed. Well, we're going to demonstrate by internal evidence based on repetition, that this has to be one author. Now here's a color-coded example of the JEPD theory. You can pick this off the internet as described by Friedman. And so he has red, Yowitz, yellow, we got yellow, green here, Elois, Priestley, blue, redactor R, the D group is not here. And there you see, if you divide it all up, looks like some kind of a complicated UPC code. And see, this would be the entire book of Genesis with all the sources. Notice the broader bands. The broader bands, when they're wider, the broader bands mean that that's written by one group and it goes on for a number of chapters. It's important to remember that there are broad bands and narrow bands. Some are very tight. You can't see them all here. And this section over in here, back over here, we're talking about the first 4 books. Deuteronomy is not in this group. It would be over here. Here's a color code for what we're going to show. We could use the same colors because we have a technical difficulty on that. So we're going to, and we need to use a highlighter. So we're going to show Yowis in magenta, Elois in green, Priestley in yellow, Redactor in red, Deuteris in gray, Deuteris 2 in darker gray, other, they're not sure, so we'll make that light blue, and Friedman error. Now maybe it's been corrected in later editions. I'll assume it has been, but in the first edition, there were a few places where when in the printing, they missed all the references in precise order, and I'm assuming it has been corrected in the future, but I don't have those editions. So here we have a repetition of the Bible versus JEPD, and now we're looking at the phrase, bless them, 7 times in Genesis. Now look at the different colors. If this was all written by one group, J, E, P, or D, they'd all be the same color, but they're not. So that phrase, bless them, here we have here, this phrase right there, first appears in Genesis 1:22 and last written in Genesis 49:28. That's 48 chapter spread to complete that heptadic meter. This kind of meter is only found through a lot of research that I've looked at over the years, through considerable examination of other ancient documents and languages, only found in the Hebrew, not found in other ancient documents. Now, notice I've got 3 colors. I think that this the Priestley, and this the redactor, and over here we have the Elois. We'll go back up to that. There's the Elois again. Elois, and there's redactor. So these are 3 sources. How can these groups, separated by hundreds of years, coordinate the same kind of editing? I mean, here we have the redactor isn't even aware of this. He's credited for writing these 2. Well, what about all these? How can the redactor be a writer? He's not even aware of the meter himself. Now here we have a solid color. Why is it all solid? Well, the answer is that if you mark a whole chapter off as written by one writer, and you don't know this meter, the meter should all come up the same color. Here we have the first chapter, over the earth, and then we have all Haaretz, 111 through 130. I'm going to back up. See, that would be way over here. That little mark, according to Friedman's colors. I'm using different colors, and here we have this group way on the end, and it's all solid because we've got it repeated 7 times. If this is happening in the first chapter, you say, well, where else is it happening? Well, it's happening within chapters, within sets of chapters, even within paragraphs, or the entire book, or entire books, including the entire Pentateuch. Here we have over the face of all the earth, 7 times in Genesis, over the face of all the earth. Here we have it. Al, Pani, Kal, Haaretz, 129 through 11:9. No, make that 41, wrapped, 41:26, over the face of all the earth. We got 3 different writers, all contributing supposedly to the same Hebraic meter in the text. What are we proving here? we're proving that it's one author. You can't have 4 separate committees, separate 100, 150 years each, all completing each other's meter, and nobody knows that the other one has the meter to begin with. This is utterly impossible, which means that the documentary hypothesis is a complete fraud. I mean, this is a real belly flop right here. Here we have solid, and it's all written in one group that creeps on the earth. That means all the priestly covered this section. And here we have it 126 through 819. And I'd say this coordination is accidental. Either the people who are breaking this up and following this code decided that this is a key phrase for the priestly group, but they sure missed this one, didn't they? Shows the inconsistency of their work. Here we have every living thing, 7 times in Genesis. And here we have living creature. Here we have it here again, 7 times, 120 through 916. And here we have the children of Israel 7 times, 32 through 50, 25. All the children of Israel. Now this is spanning the whole book. See, here we are on the front end of Genesis. Here we are on the back end of Genesis. Look at that spread right here, 32 to 50, 29, and we've got supposedly 1, 2, 3 different groups. JEP are all involved in this. Utterly impossible. This is the work of one writer, not 3. Once you find the meter, you can prove visually, especially with color coding, that the whole document hypothesis is a complete fraud. But it's being taught in the finest universities by the most reputable scholars in the world. And they continually talk about the Bible being a series of myths. Here's another book on the subject, the Book of Genesis, a biography by Ron Handel. He's at the University of California in Berkeley, and this book was published by Princeton back in 2013. And in this, he talks about the book of Genesis as being an anthology of myths. It's a tradition, and we should all get friendly with it, but it never really happened, and it's not written by one author. He's a total proponent of JEPD, but he is not aware, with all his scholarship, he's not aware that this repetition undoes his entire scholarly work and exposes the fraud. This is as bad as the work of the great scientist Louis Pasteur. There were people in his time who were adamant that there was no such thing as germs. In fact, they even died believing that, even when he had proven the fact. They were not going to let go of the fact that there were no germs. They were going to go to the grave with that. Well, a lot of people after that have known that the hangers-on, they made a big mistake. And I would show you another example of a book that I find particularly interesting. Here we have a book, Who Really Wrote the Bible? And this is by E.L. Ravnoy. He claims that JEPD is a complete fraud. He's right. And Who Really Wrote the Bible? E.L. Ravnoy is a Los Angeles rabbi, wrote a marvelous book and has exactly the opposite opinion of Friedman and of Ron Handel. Here we have, and I am the Lord thy God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. 7 times in the Pentateuch. That means here we have Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's not in Genesis, but it appears 7 times, and these are all by the same writer, except this one. Missed that one. They never found the 7th one because they're crediting it to a deuterist. Total mistake. There are 7. In the entire Pentateuch, this phrase only appears exactly 7 times. Why is this taking place? It appears that this whole concept of Hebraic meter is designed for text authentication. If we find it a problem, what about 3,500 years ago? Anybody could get a scroll and copy it and make alterations. How do you know if you've got the original? That's their problem too, not just ours. How do we know we have the original text? So we find this meter buried in the text to prove that we have the original text. And what's the probability here? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words in repetition. That's 7 to the 7th power. A statistical impossibility. The Lord God 7 times, all right. We have what? One writer here. The Lord God 7 times, and this is called in the construct. You won't find this unless you're looking at the Hebrew, because it's in the Hebrew construct. And here we find the phrase, and here we find to my Lord. Here they're looking at that phrase, and JEPD calls it right. That's because they're looking at the phrase, but they're not aware of the meter. They didn't know the meter was in there, whether they have it right or not. They didn't know it was there because down here, to my Lord, they missed it completely. There it is. There's the error exposed right there. 1827 to 4718, and they missed it at 3314. And called his name 7 times. That's without the yud. And here we have, and she bore a son and called his name. 1, 2, 3, and look at this. 2 different writers, 2 different groups. This one is solid. The land of Goshen, the phrase, the land of Goshen, exactly 7 times. And called his name exactly 7 times. So sometimes by hit and miss, JEPD might catch one or catch a couple. But then they miss all the others, which means their whole philosophy is nothing but random selection based on their own myths about the Bible. The people who are claiming that the Bible is a source of myths are practicing complete mythology or practicing mythology of their own that they've created. Now they've been following it for 150 years. What a farce this has all become. And he said to him, that phrase, exactly and only 7 times. 3 different writers, JEP. 3 different writers. Here we have it, Genesis 3:9, 35:11. Here we have, and answered and said, here we have it again, 18:27 to 40:18, 7 times, missed again. And said Laban 7 times, and said Judah 7 times. This one they hit, this one they missed completely. It shows you how random their whole process and their scholarship really is. They're following their own myths. And the Bible will expose who has the real mythology. It's Harvard, it's Yale, it's Oxford, Princeton, Cambridge. Every great university of the world is practicing a mythology when they claim that the Bible is a source of mythology. Now there's turnabout. There's the truth, and you're seeing it with your own eyes. And Israel said 7 times, here we have, and Pharaoh said to Joseph 7 times. Notice we're all using heptadic meter here, and 7s, and he said to them, that phrase, an anaphoric phrase, and he said to them, right over in this the location here, Vayamar Elohim, exactly 14 times. Double heptadic meter. 3 different writers. The entire scholarly world has no idea that this meter is buried in the text and it's been there for 3,500 years to certify that every time you pick up the Bible and you look at that Genesis text, you're looking at the original. You're looking at what they really wrote back then. Otherwise, this meter couldn't be there. 14 times in Genesis 10, or I should say, yes, and 10 times with the article. That's the. So you have meter inside a meter. You have a 10 and a 14. The longer ones often have multiple meters inside them. And here we go from Genesis 15:1 to 48:1. And notice again, 14 times these things. And he said to them, 14 times, in grace in eyes, 14 times. That phrase about in the eyes of, that's a Hebrew expression. Not always translated as a Hebrew expression, You need the more literal translation to find this. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So grace in the eyes exactly 14 times. Again, a total miss for JEPD. Here it is in Hebrew for those who would be interested in seeing this, the actual Hebrew itself. And here we have lift up eyes. He lifted up his eyes, and Lot lifted up his eyes. Lift up now thine eyes. He lifted up his eyes. That's Genesis 13:10 through 43:29. Exactly 14 times. Double hepatic meter. Here's the Hebrew. It appears only 14 times. Obviously we're using computer search to prove this and to establish the validity and the genius of Umberto Cascione, and that he called this whole process, some of it he found, but with a computer, when his methodology is applied, everything opens up and proves how right he really was. He's ignored today, but how right he really was. In the eyes of, here it is exactly 14 times. 7 years. 3 times 7, 21. The phrase 7 years appears 21 times. The longer these meters get, the more it exposes the whole fraudulent nature of the documentary hypothesis. Genesis 5:7 through Genesis 47:28. All the firstborn in Exodus 10 times. And here's the Hebrew. JEP covers the whole spectrum in Exodus. Another total belly flop for the documentary hypothesis. And God saw 10 times in Exodus and Genesis. And here we have missed this one. All it takes is one. Genesis 6:12. And there's the problem. That it was good. We have 3 different writers. JEP. That it was good in Genesis 1:4 to Genesis 49:15, exactly 10 times. And it came to pass 10 times. Genesis 12:11 through Genesis 43:2. Be fruitful and multiply. Genesis 1:22 to Genesis 48:4, exactly 10 times. Only 10 times. All the same, I think JEPD was using this as a marker to divide up what they thought was the priestly code, but I doubt that they knew that it was there 10 times. Just because you see that they have it 10 times doesn't mean they were aware of it. I'm finding out where they're following their own process, which means whoever has developed this JEPD, and that goes back to Julius Wellhausen, is looking at that phrase as a marker. And so they caught one, but they don't know it's in there 10 times. So in this one, they got it. Fowl of the air, 10 times. Missed it right there. 1:20 through 9:2. And God said in Genesis, simple phrase, Vayamar Elohim, exactly 20 times. Look at that spread. In all the land of Canaan, 20 times. That phrase starts in 13:12, talking back with Abram, down to 50 verse 5. In all the land of Canaan, exactly 20 times, doubled the cattle. Here's dodecattle, all flesh, 12 times. Notice they got the 2 sources in error here. And there's only one meter, and it's exactly 12 times. 7 years, 12 times in Genesis. Absolute form, no prefix. That's a Hebrew, we're talking about Hebrew grammar here, but there you can see the spread on this particular phrase. So the text has meter woven all through it. And only those who are aware of it can certify that we have the original text. When they lost that awareness, we don't know. But it's never been lost. We still have it. in all the land of Egypt 12 times. Starts over here, 5:12, 11:6. Pure gold, the phrase pure gold right here, exactly 24 times. There's the Hebrew. Exodus 25 through 39:30. Now here, these are instructions for building the tabernacle and all the articles in the tabernacle, and therefore, if you mark that whole section as priestly, it's all going to come up the same color. But I can assure you, they had no idea that phrase was in there exactly 24 times in double dodecadal meter. Here we have from the land of Egypt 50 times. Now this gets more extensive. We could go through these longer phrases many times, have many examples of these. I'm going to give you just one. From the land of Egypt 50 times. That's 5 times decadal meter. From the land of Egypt. Look at the color change. Starts in Genesis 21:21. Keeps on going. Now I'm down this one on Numbers. Look at the color changes. And here we have, it goes right through Genesis 29:24. Let's back up on that one. It starts in Genesis. The meter starts in Genesis and continues through Exodus. Keeps going through Exodus, Leviticus, starts, here's Numbers, goes into Numbers, then switches to Deuteronomy, covers every single so-called writer of the Pentateuch. All sources, including the redactor, all of them, all colors shown, no possibility of being aware that all those phrases were in Hebraic meter, which would mean that the entire Pentateuch has one source and one document. This exposes the fraudulent nature of the whole theory right there. So I appreciate this opportunity to present this information. And if you'd like to know more about it, you can read Repetition of the Bible by myself, the author, Giacchino Michael Cascione, edited by David Kuski, Robert Preuss, Robert Dargitz, and Ralph Preuss. And available copies at this address here, or call 586-553-0555. And there is also another book that preceded Repetition of the Bible, and it is titled In Search of the Biblical Order, something I had worked on from 1978 until 2012. And then it was after reading the work of Umberto Cassuto and then applying additional work by Dr. Diana Jill Kirby, who was the one who was able to give us the nomenclature for all of this in her dissertation, Repetition of the Book of Revelation, and then the work of Meir Sternberg and his marvelous work on poetics in the Old Testament. And what a marvelous work those scholars put together. And I use these sources to arrive at this book here, now published, Repetition of the Bible. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about the source and origin of the first 5 books of the Bible. When you open the book and you read it, you're looking at the original. Thank you.